Thanks for coming to this webinar. Just before we start, I just want to introduce you to who we are. I'm Mariana Morris. I run a small UX design studio called Fruto, and we are based in Oxford, and we design intuitive interfaces and meaningful experiences for the web, mobile, and emerging technologies. We work with a variety of sectors, including healthcare, publishing, and education. And we work very much as an extension of our clients' team. To provide the UX expertise or be an extra capacity to their team. We work with global organizations to small startups as well. And I just want to give you a few examples of projects that is relevant to this webinar, where we created a design system or pattern libraries, including the color palettes as part of the pattern libraries. So one of them was a UI design system for doctors.net.uk, which is the UK's largest network of doctors. So we did a major redesign for them for their website. And then one part of it was to create a design system with a pattern library UI color palette. And Carmen was the designer working on this color this design system. We also worked on the user interface and UX design for Zegami, which is a startup, a spin-out of the University of Oxford. And they are a visualization app, and we also worked on a design system for them and worked on with them on a long-term contract, doing a whole bunch of designs, user interface designs. And also in terms of startups, Percodia is a spin-out of the University of Oxford, and on this one, we didn't need a design system because it was such a small project, but we did need to create the colors in our color palette and have much more freedom in terms of color for the UI. So this webinar is about practical creation and application of a UI color palette. I'm hosting this webinar, meaning that at the time of the questions, I'll be managing that. But the main person in this webinar is Carmen, who is one of our UX designers. Carmen has been working with us at Fruto for the past 2 years and has been leading lots of UI design projects for us. I'll hand over to Carmen.
Mm-hmm. Great, so I'll share my screen. Great. So yeah, thank you, Mariana, for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Carmen, and on my day-to-day tasks at Fruto, I focus a little bit more on the UI side. And I have a particular interest in UI and experience in creating and applying color palettes to a wide range of projects. And like you've seen, some of them were really big and a lot of other ones were a bit smaller. So with that said, before we start, I also wanted to give you an overview of the goal of this webinar. So we put this webinar together to provide you with an effective and efficient way of creating and applying a UI color palette. And we're going to do that by providing you with a formula for creating a palette, showing you the steps for creating that palette to a UI design, for applying that palette to a UI design, give you a basic understanding of color terminology and theory, and last, to provide you with the resources for practicing the application of your color palette on your own time. So you'll be able to take this away and redo this exercise as many times as you like. So with that said, this session is recorded and will be available on our website. And so will be the resources for you to download and have a go at this. So with that said, let me just take you through the agenda quickly. So it's a 1-hour webinar. We're going to have a 40 to 45 minutes presentation and then a 15 to 20 minute Q&A that Mariana will be running for me and asking me the questions. And in the webinar, we're going to cover a couple things. So first, we're going to look at a brief. So this is a hypothetical brief that I've put together from a hypothetical client. And then in part 1, we're going to be choosing the palette. And within that, we're going to decide on a color combination rule, choose our main colors or brand colors, choose our neutral or foundation colors, and choose our system colors. So At the moment, there might be a little bit of jargon here, but I will go through what each of these things means once we get started. And then in part 2 of this webinar, we're going to be applying this palette in a live demo onto a UI that I got from Envato Elements and kind of like customized to fit this exercise and so on. Then we'll have a look at the results, and lastly, we'll do the Q&A session. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So before we get to choosing colors and so on, I also wanted to point out that I wrote an article called A Guide to Color in UI Design, where I go through the terminology, the roles of color in the user experience, some tips and tricks for the creation of a palette. So you can read this on our website or on Medium. If you haven't read it, it's not a problem at all. Don't worry. I'm going to go through all the terminology and try to explain this as clear as possible. But if you haven't read it, then yeah, I hope it's a good read and that it supports this webinar a little bit. Great, so the first thing we're gonna have a look at is the brief that this client provided us. So this brief is for an app called the Cactus Shop. And the client has given us some branding requirements. So they said that the Cactus Shop doesn't have a defined brand yet. And the idea is that they will be able to create these mock-ups of a few pages to communicate their vision to potential customers and investors. And they also said that the vision for the app is to be modern, but with a warm, cozy, and welcoming feel. They mentioned that they don't want anything too clinical. And then they said that they're into the vintage look, but keeping that sense of modernity. And they said that they're open to ideas on how the look and feel should be, but that they do want some kind of green as part of their colors. And then in terms of accessibility requirements, the client didn't specify anything, but at Fruto, we always make sure to meet the AA level of accessibility from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. With that said, because this webinar, accessibility is a huge, huge topic. So in this webinar, I'm gonna mainly be focusing on background text contrast. So in that sort of way of accessibility. Great, so now we can jump right into it. So in the part 1, we're gonna be choosing the palette. So before we choose the palette, I need to give an intro on the color wheel because this is what we're gonna base everything on. So it was invented in the 17th century by Isaac Newton, who mapped the color spectrum into a circle. It's the basis of color theory because it shows the relationship between colors. Color theory is a practical combination of art and science that is used to determine what colors look good together. And colors that look good together are called color harmony. And artists and designers, we use this to create a particular look and feel. And you can use this color wheel to find color harmonies by using the rules of color combination. So color combinations determine the relative positions of different colors in order to find colors that create a pleasing effect. And there are 2 types of color wheel. There's the RYB or red, yellow, blue color wheel. And this color wheel is not the one that you're seeing here. This is the RGB one. And this first color wheel is used by artists, for example, because it's based on paint, mixing paint. And then there's the RGB or red, green, and blue color wheel, which is the one that we will be using. That is used for digital and screen uses. And yeah, this is, it goes off the base that you're mixing light, like colored light. So it's a little bit different. Great, so the first thing we're gonna do in order to create our brand colors or our main colors is decide on a color combination type. So there's quite a few, and there's a couple of reasons why you would want to use a combination type. So first, it ensures you use colors that work together. Second is less time in choosing colors. Some of you might not feel very comfortable choosing colors or might not have the experience, so it just saves you a little bit of time. And then the third, it's easier to justify choices to clients because you can go and be like, okay, well, this is the combination I've chosen and this is why it looks good and works. And then with that said, there's different types of combinations. So as you can see here on the right, you have the monochromatic combination, which uses tints, tones and shades of one base color. So a tint is basically the color mixed with pure white. A tone is the color mixed with pure gray, and a shade is the color mixed with pure black. When I say pure black and pure gray, I mean colors that are completely desaturated. I'm gonna explain this a little bit better once we move on. But yeah, it was just an introduction to that. And then you have analogous color palettes, which means that the colors are next to each other in the color wheel. So blue with green and so on. Then you have complementary, which are basically opposite colors in the color wheel. And then you have triadic, which means that the colors are at equidistant points in the color wheel. And then there's tetradic, which is basically the same as triadic, but introducing one more color. So you have 4 colors instead of 3. So with that said, so you might ask yourself, okay, so I have all of these combinations. So how am I supposed to know which one I'm supposed to choose? So choosing a combination will depend on a couple things. So mainly these three points. So the first one is the number of components in the interface. In our case, we're going to be working, I'm going to explain this interface a little bit better in a minute. But in our case, we don't have a massive amount of components. It's just 5 screens. So we have some cards, some buttons, some decorative elements, some text, and so on. So it's not a massive amount of components, and that means that we wouldn't need a lot of colors. Where, for example, an interface like a dashboard that has graphs and charts and tags and so on, that might need a little bit more flexibility in terms of number of colors, because they're gonna have different usage. And then the purpose of the interface, in our case, the client, our hypothetical client, said that they needed to sort of impress investors and attract potential customers. And then the interface usage. So how will users interact with it? Is it like a marketing website? Is it a dashboard, like we said? In our case, the user goal is to choose a cactus, read a little bit about it, and check out as quickly and as fast as possible. So then with this in mind, I have chosen to use the triadic combination for the sake of this exercise, which is the one that you see here on the right. So this combination, as we said before, takes 3 colors that have equal space between each other, or they're at equidistant points. And this way of choosing colors provides a high contrast and impactful color palette, much like the complementary color combination, but having 3 colors makes it a little bit more flexible. So you'd say, okay, so would that mean that I can't choose, I don't know, complementary or like a tetradic color combination? So the answer is no. You can make it work with other types of combination, but because of the 3 reasons that we stated above, I thought this might be the best fit. However, that does not mean that you couldn't make the complementary combination work, for example, or even the analogous one. Great, so now that we've chosen a color combination, which is the triadic one, we're gonna be choosing our main colors. So before we choose our main colors, based on this rule, I wanna talk a little bit about the anatomy of a color palette. So a color palette has three areas. So the main colors, which are primary and secondary, and these are usually like brand colors. Then we have our neutral or foundation colors, and these are the colors that, in my opinion, either make or break an interface. I see a lot of designers and people focusing a lot on brand colors and sort of leaving neutral or foundation colors as an afterthought. And they're gonna be the colors that bring those brand colors to the surface and support the whole interface. And then lastly, you have system colors that are colors that denotate, for example, error states, warning states. So for example, if a user tries to go through a form without filling one of the fields, an error message would pop up, and that would be in red, for example. And if you've completed a field successfully, you might get like a success message that might be in green. So system colors come in. So green is usually for success. Warning is either orange or yellow. And then if error is usually red. So with that said, we already have an idea of a base color that would go well with the brand. So which is this green that you see here on the left. To get to this green, I tried a couple other greens that I later on discarded either because of accessibility in terms of background text contrast and because of the look and feel it would create. So even if we're saying that there are obviously rules and ways to applying color in an objective way, there's always going to be that tiny subjective feel to it, right? So for example, with this one, this is not subjective because this doesn't pass background text contrast accessibility. It just wouldn't work. And because we don't know what we're going to be using the green for just yet, you want to choose a color that it's neither too light or too dark, because then you're going to run into problems later. So you want to choose something kind of in the middle. And then this one, for example, in this case, it would be a little bit subjective because you could make this color work as it passes accessibility. But personally, I wanted to go with this one because it's a little bit cooler and less grass-like. But I'm sure that if you were to do this exercise with this color, you'd probably also end up with a really nice and functional UI. So why does this color work, the one that we've chosen? So it's not too bright. That is the value of a color. So the value is how bright or dark a color is. And so it will avoid a very clinical modern feel. So if you go, for example, to a healthcare website or education, usually the colors are very bright and they give that sort of very clean and fresh look and feel. But the client asks for a more vintage kind of look and feel. So we're gonna get away from that a little bit. The second reason, as I mentioned just before, is that it passes the required AA level of accessibility. And this I checked with Clues. Clues is a plugin that you can install on Sketch. And I would really recommend you installing this plugin. It's really great. And when you check the colors, if it says it's not accessible, you can sort of change the color at the same time to see if you know, how light or dark it becomes accessible. So it's a really good plugin. And then the third reason, as I said, is it caters to the brief's requirement of using green, because the client did say that they needed some green color in there. So now that we have our green chosen, we have to understand how that fits into the color rule of the color combination rule that we've chosen, which is the triadic color combination. So we're gonna jump into the Canva color wheel. There's no need for you to do this because I've attached the screenshot of how the tool looks. You just have to Google Canva color wheel. So there's a couple of reasons why I like Canva. So there's many tools out there for combining colors or creating palettes, but I like Canva because first, it creates a basic palette rather than a finished one. So for example, in other tools that are also really good, like for example, Colors, written with two O's at the beginning, that's a great tool, but it's more like they show you, okay, here's your beautiful palette, but it's complex. It's not a very simple palette. So then if you don't have a lot of experience with colors or you don't feel very comfortable, you might be getting into a little bit of a problem there. Then the second reason is that all colors are at the same level of hierarchy. So what do I mean by the same level of hierarchy? I mean that they are the same in value. So we just mentioned is like how bright or dark the color is. And they're the same in saturation, which is how vibrant or how much pigment a color is. So the duller the color, the less saturation, the more vibrant, the more saturation. So the reason why you want to start with colors that are all at the same level, like you can see here, is that we don't really know what we're gonna be using these colors for. We still haven't made that decision. So it's good to start on the same level, so then you don't have to sort of compromise because a color is too light and you can't use it for something or so on. Another reason why I love Canva is that you can use one color as your base. So in our case, we chose this green. So as you can see here on the right, I've added like our base color, which is this green. And then it's just very simple to use because you can add your green and then you click on the drop down and select what color combination you want. In our case is the triadic one, and it automatically creates that result for you with the three colors, and you can export the palette in SVG and then put it into Sketch, for example, as a PNG, and you can even create a graphic with it. Personally, I don't really use that feature. Great. So now that we have a sense of what the triadic combination looks with that base green, the next step is assigning functions to the main colors. So the two most important functions that you will always have to have in mind when designing an interface that will need a color assigned are elements that allow the user to move forward within the interface. So for example, call to action buttons or CTAs, and elements that reveal the visibility of the system status. So for example, selected tabs, selected navigation items, etc. So things that allow the user to understand where they are or what position within the interface they're at. So in our case, I've decided to use green for buttons, purple for selections, and the yellow, I'm actually still not sure, so I've just written other. What I do know is that I'm not gonna be using it with text on top, so we don't have to worry about background text contrast accessibility on that one. And you might ask, okay, so why did you decide to use green for buttons and purple for selections? Why couldn't it be the other way around? The answer is it could be the other way around, but because the client sort of asked for this green element to be in it, looking at the interface, the buttons are actually quite prominent, and there's quite a few, as you can see here, the plus, the by, and the done. So by using green, we're sort of going to bring a little bit more of that tone, of that hue into the interface. And if I were to swap them and be like, okay, I'll use purple for buttons, then the selection items that would be green in that case, they're just not as many. So we're not going to be bringing as much of that color in, which we do. So that's the reason why I decided to use buttons in green, selections in purple, and the yellow we'll see in a minute. So the next step, once you sort of have, this sort of functions assigned, you can always change them later. They're not set in stone, but in this case, I'm gonna go with this. So the next step after that is adjusting your colors. So the one we're gonna be adjusting is the yellow. So although it's exactly at the same level as the other two colors in saturation and value, we will be using the yellow in a different level within the UI hierarchy. And therefore, we can afford to tweak it to be a little bit less muddy and less saturated. Again, for example, this could be a subjective thing here. I personally don't think this color would look really good in an interface, so I decided to tweak it because I know that I'm not going to be using it at the same level. And then you'd wonder, okay, so how do I adjust it? So on the right here, I've shown you with the color picker from Sketch, you would basically move the picker from right to left, so from more saturated to less saturated, and then up to get like a lighter color. So as you can see, the movement here is left to make it less saturated, up to make it a bit lighter, and then here you can see the adjustment a little bit better in the difference between the two. Great, so now we have our three colors. And now this is perhaps the most important step that I was talking about before, that a lot of times I see people overlooking this step or they just do it really quickly. And it's choosing your neutral or foundation colors. So in order to do this, we're gonna create all neutrals from your main colors. And in that way, you can't get it wrong. So I see a lot of times like designers sort of think that you need a lot of grays for an interface and they just create random grays that don't really go with the brand colors. So the best solution, if you are not really sure about colors, and not even that, I do this all the time, like this is what I use, is doing it from your brand colors. So as you can see here on the left, I've said that we've created 2 tints of the main brand green, 2 tones of each of the brand colors, and 2 shades, and 1 shade, sorry, for each of them. So just as a reminder, tints, pure white plus the color, tones, pure gray plus the color, shades, pure black plus the color. So how I've built it is that I have the 3 brand colors at the top, and then I've included a layer of green behind this, and then a layer of white on top. And I've set that layer of white to 95% of opacity. And then if you were to color, like, to eyedrop this color, it would give you that hex code. Same with this, with the tones, layer of green underneath, layer of gray on top, set it to 75% opacity. And if you were to eyedrop this, it would give you this color. So you'd think, okay, so why are you adding 2 tints and not 5, or two tones and not 1, or just 1 shade? So this is my personal formula that I'm giving to you through a lot of trial and error. And I've come up with this sort of formula that I think works. And the idea of this is to give you something that you can apply to any project, not just this project. So you could always start with this. And this doesn't mean that we're going to be using all of these colors, but it's a good starting point to have an idea of the neutrals that we have available. And then as we apply them to the interface, we're going to be checking them. So which ones are we using? And the ones that we're not using at the very end, we'll just discard and they won't be part of our final palette. But this gives you a little bit of flexibility. Great. And then the 4th step to completing the palette. So we have brand colors, then we have our neutrals, and this is the 3rd step, which is choosing the system colors. And system colors, as I explained before, they denotate states, so error, success. In our case, you can see that I haven't included all of them here just because in our interface, we're not gonna go into that level of detail, just because these are just, as the client mentioned, mock-ups to show to investors. So we wouldn't be getting into that level of detail to show error states and success states and so on. So I've given them some thought. The ones that you always kind of need are error and success. So they're here and you have to take them into account, but for this exercise, we won't be using these two. Great, so now we can go to the exciting part, which is applying the palette to the interface. So before we do that, I'm gonna give you a quick overview of what we're gonna be doing here in Sketch and sort of the structure of the document. So you can see that here I have the black and white version of the designs that you've been seeing until now. This is good practice. If you're not good at choosing colors or you don't feel very confident, always start with black and white. Now you might think, okay, so what's the difference between this and a wireframe? So a wireframe is much more simple. You might not have icons in a wireframe. You might not have decorative elements. Usually you don't. You don't have shadows and border radius and things like that. While in a black and white version of a design, you do. So this is beneficial because then you can see how each step of applying the colors works and you don't get overwhelmed by, by the use of color, and you can focus on layout and things like that.
Carmen,
and then
we are seeing the slides, is that right?
Oh, that's weird. Let me check. Can you see what I'm seeing now?
Oh, now I can see Sketch now, yeah.
Great, so yeah, just as I was saying, this is the black and white version. It's good practice if you're not really confident with colors. And then down here, this is what we're gonna be doing together. So we're gonna be working on this set of pages to create this. So this is what we're aiming for. And in terms of the interface, just to give you like a quick overview, we have 5 pages, a welcome page, then we have home where the user can choose like some cactus types that they have. Then you have the search where they can filter these cactus by, whether they're succulents or orchids or whatever it is. Then they can click they can tap on a specific plant and they will get the details of that plant. So the product detail page, they will see how much water, how many hours of sunlight, and so on. And then the last page is the cart where they will just see what they're about to buy and check out. So that's the interface summary. And now I'm just gonna bring you over here to this area, and you can see that this is the same color palette. Can you see how I changed my screen now, Mariana? Yeah, okay, great. So this is the same color palette that we just saw here, and I've just migrated it to Sketch so we can work with it here too. The only difference between this and the presentation is that you can see that these 3 brand colors have a tick. This is because we know for sure we're gonna be using these colors, so they have a tick. As we apply the colors to this interface here, we're gonna be checking them. So if we use this color, I will add a tick there. And then by the end, the ones that don't have ticks, they will be discarded. And then we have the typography scale here to the left. So this is also very good practice. Even if, even if you are very comfortable with typography, it's still really good practice to have an artboard where all your type styles are here. So at the moment, I already have a style for this in Sketch. So as you can see here, you can see that this already has a style here on the right applied. This is just to save us a little bit of time. So when we apply color to text in this webinar, you'll see that I'm gonna be applying it directly from the type scale rather than going here and trying to find the style and applying them. And you should do this in every document you have in Sketch, because otherwise you're sort of setting yourself up for failure if you don't have all your styles there. Great. So after that intro of the interface, let's get started. So the first step is going to be applying color to any big area. So these are the steps that I do myself when I do an interface, right? So hopefully they'll be useful for you too. So the first thing is we're going to apply background and content cards, which is something that is quite common in interfaces, having content cards. So let's go ahead and apply the background first. So in order to do that, I'm going to come here and select all my artboards. And I'm going to hide you here at the top. There we go. And because so now you see that I've chosen the yellow here. So the reason why I've chosen that is because if I choose the pink, the very light tint of the pink color or the purple color, it's gonna give like a really girly kind of feel, and we don't want that, or we wouldn't imagine the client wants that. And then the green one, the green tint over here, that would probably give us a more clinical feel because it's a very fresh minty color. So we want a more vintage look, and therefore I'm gonna go for the yellow, so the yellow tint. So I'm just gonna color sample, I'm gonna sample that, and you can see just changed. And before we forget, I'm gonna go ahead and add a tick to this color because we're gonna be using it for the background. The next thing is applying color to the content card. So for the fill, we're gonna have white, and then we're gonna have a shadow that is one of the tones of the main brand yellow. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna select all the cards that we have. And I am gonna go ahead, and I've already prepared a layer style just to save us a little bit of time. So I'm just gonna go ahead and apply that. And if you can see, the shadow just got applied. And I'm gonna do exactly the same for these two over here. And now I'm gonna show you how this style is built. And in case you don't know, how to also create a layer style in Sketch. But first, let me just apply this to all the cards. So we have content card over here, and then the last two would be these ones. Great, so now that we have all the cards applied, let me just zoom in into one, and we can have a look at how it's made. So we have a fill that is white. White should be in your color palette, but just for the sake of exercise, I thought it might add a little bit of clutter. So you should add it at the very end, but it's almost a given that interfaces that are in light mode or are gonna have some kind of white in them. So for the shadow, you can see that the shadow is over here. So let's have a look at what color that shadow is using. So to make sure I'm sampling the right color, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the color picker, and I think it's this one. Yep. So we're gonna go ahead and check this color over here. The reason why I chose this color is because it wouldn't make sense having a pink shadow on a yellow background. So you wanna make sure everything is coordinated, and therefore I'm gonna be using a tone of the main brand yellow. Great, and then I said I was gonna show you how to create the layer style for those of you that might not know. So it's very simple. All you have to do in Sketch is you have a rectangle or whatever it is. And then let's just say you wanna make this rectangle red and you want it to have borders that are blue. So we're gonna do that. The borders, I said blue. And then basically what you have to do is you just grab the shape, and here where you say appearance in this panel here that I just collapsed, opened, you just say create and you name it something. So you wanna name it, I don't know, red rectangle. And that's it. So now if I were to change this and say, okay, actually I prefer it green, you see it has an asterisk over here. That means that you've updated it, but you haven't updated the style. So if you say update in this button here, it will just update. Otherwise, you can reset it. So if you made a mistake and you're like, actually, no, I wanted to have this red fill with the blue outline, you can come here and say reset style, and it'll go back to what you originally set it as. So yeah, with that said, I'm just gonna delete this because we're not gonna need this. Great, so now we have the background and the content cards applied, which is great. So now let's go into the second step, which perhaps is the most important step. And I also see a lot of mistakes or lack of attention in this when I look at other UI designs, is that all buttons look the same, but not all buttons do the same thing. So the most important buttons within the interface are gonna be call to action buttons. So for those, we're gonna have our green as a fill, as we said before, and we're gonna have two shadows depending on what background they're placed on, right? So we're gonna have a yellow shadow for when the button is placed on a yellow background, and we're gonna have a green shadow when it's placed on a white background. The reason for this is that, as I said before, you're not gonna mix colors, right? So if the button is placed on a yellow background, on our nice yellow background, it wouldn't be able to have a pink shadow. It wouldn't make sense. And then for when it's placed on white, so like for example here, I've decided to use a green shadow. The reason for this is because warm colors on white in terms of shadows can look a little bit muddy, and we don't want that. We want it to still look very clean and fresh, even though we're going for that vintage look. So you wouldn't want to put this shadow on a white background. This might be a personal thing again, but yeah, I think it might look a bit better. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's do the standard buttons first, the call to action buttons first, and then we'll jump into the standard buttons that are still important, just not as important as call to action buttons, because these are the ones that are going to show the user how to navigate the interface. So In order to do that, I also prepared a layer just to save us a little bit of time. So we're gonna, as you can see here, I said buttons, CTA buttons, default is the one on yellow, and on white is the one on the white background. So let's go ahead and apply that to all the buttons that are on yellow. And then I'm just gonna zoom in into one and show you how it's built, and we can check the color on our color palette. Great, so those are all the CTA buttons applied there. And now let's look into how it's built. So the green is already checked, so that's perfect. And then let's have a look at the shadow. So the shadow is actually the same color as the shadow for the cards, which would make sense as they're placed on the same tint background. So that one is already checked, so we don't have to do anything there. And now we're gonna go and apply the standard buttons. So there's many ways of styling this. I'm not saying that the way I'm styling it here is the only way at all, but I like to have the standard buttons relate to the call to action buttons somehow. So the somehow is going to be the green. That's what we're gonna use to relate them both. So this one has a fill that is green. This one is going to have a border that is green, and then the inside is going to be one of the tints of the main brand green. So let's go ahead and do that. So, oh, actually, I just realized that we missed some standard buttons some CTA buttons over here. So before I do that, let me just copy this into here. Hold on. Sometimes Sketch, bear with me. Let's see if we paste those. And yeah, so sorry for that. I forgot to show you what the shadow here would be. So we said that one is the yellow shadow and the other one is actually a green shadow. So hold on, before we jump into the standard buttons. This shadow is actually this one over here, which makes sense because they're at the same level. So let's go ahead and add our tick to that one. Perfect. And then let me just add this button over here as well. Perfect. And then same with these ones over here. They're built exactly the same way. Perfect. Okay, so now we can jump into the standard buttons. So a standard button would probably be this, for example. So if I also have a layer style applied for that. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And then the icon inside, I'm also gonna choose to make it green. So I'm just gonna color sample. I drop this color here and sample this green over here as well. Great, so now we have that there. Another thing that we're going to be treating as standard buttons are these ones over here, because they're not as important as the button to say done and like check out. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace that. Oops, copy that. There we go. And another element that we're going to be treating, giving the same treatment as the standard buttons, not to introduce too many styles, is these tabs over here. So when the user comes and filters these, they are kind of buttons, but they're tabs, but we're going to give them the same treatment as the standard buttons. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this first, and I'm just going to copy the ones that we have on this design here. Perfect. And then let's have a look at how these standard buttons are built. So the green, we already know that is checked, and we just need to make sure that we're checking this fill on our color palette. So let's have a look at what this fill is. Right, so it's this one over here. Yep, so let's go ahead and check that because we're gonna be using it. And let me have a look. So yeah, so now we have all our standard buttons and CTA buttons applied, which is great. So let's jump into the presentation again. Great, so within this area of applying color to interactive elements, these are the two most important, but we also can't forget about links, selected items, and icons with an interaction. So let's do the links first. So for the links, this is also maybe my personal preference, but I also like the links to be related somehow to the color of the call to action button, because it's something that takes you somewhere else, right? So I'm gonna go for the same green. So the only links that we have in our interface at the moment is this to view all. So I'm just gonna come here to our type scale and make this green. So I already have the style applied on the pages. So all I have to do is sample the green, and then you can see the asterisk appeared there. And if I just say update, you can see that the view all just changed to green. So those are actually the only links we're gonna have here. Then we're gonna do the selected items. So for the selected items, we're gonna use the purple as we said before. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this navigation bar at the bottom directly. So it's a little bit easier. So the search also is gonna be purple. And in this case, we wouldn't have to check anything on our typography scale just because the purple is already checked. So let's go ahead and do that. And then there's another item in this interface that is selected, which is this tab over here when they filter. So for that, I'm also gonna give it the same treatment as the purple. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this from the final design into here. And now the only color that we would have to check is this sort of background that we've applied to it that brings together the sort of icon. So let's have a look at what that color is on our colors over here. So if I sample that, I believe it's this one. Yep. So let's add the tick to this one over here. Great. And, you know, it's always a good sign when things are on the same level, right? So for example, these are our shadows. These are the fills for some of our button or interactive elements, which is a good thing. You don't want to have something here and then this has this color. So similar things have similar colors, even though they're not the same hue, which is just the color. They have, yeah, they're on their own. So the next thing we're going to do, so the next thing we're gonna do is do icons with an interaction. So that means icons that do something, that they're not just there to inform the user. So for example, in our interface, interactive icons would be the burger menu here at the top, these icons here of the navigation because they have an action behind them, this arrow, for example. Non-interactive icons would be these ones, for example, because these are just to inform the user on the amount of water, light, and temperature that this plant needs. So let's go ahead and do that. So these ones over here, because I copy pasted the navigation, they already have that the color that we're gonna apply to them. So you'd ask, okay, so why are you using this purple? The reason why is because they're gonna be mainly in the navigation, and it would be weird to have something that is green and then when it gets selected, it's purple. So you wanna make sure you're like matching that, even if they're not gonna be exactly the same purple as this. They're a tone of that purple. So let's go ahead, and these ones are already there. So let's go ahead and replace our burger menus with the right ones here and here. And the arrow is gonna stay in white, so we don't have to do anything to that one. And then we're just gonna replace this arrow with this one over here. And now let's have a look at the actual color so we make sure that we have it checked. So this one, I believe, is a tone of the main purple. Let's have a look. Yep, that one is the color. So we're gonna go ahead and add a tick to this color over here. Perfect, so you can see it's starting to come together. Great, so now that we've applied all the color to interactive elements, call to action, standard buttons, links, selected items, and icons with an interaction, we're gonna go to the third step, which is applying color to text and other text elements. The reason why I've added this other text elements is this item here, which are content separators. So in our case, we only have one content separator, which is this line you see here. And it might seem like such a small detail, but in other interfaces like dashboards, for example, where you might have a lot of tables that have, you know, content separated by lines. If you choose the wrong color for this and you have a table full of these separators in, I don't know, bright pink, it might actually detract from the information on the table, which is the important thing. So in this case, you might think it's a very small detail, but always consider it because they can actually become really annoying if there's a lot of them and they're in the wrong color. So great, so let's start with all main text. So for all main text, you're not gonna notice so much the difference because at the moment in this design, it's actually pure black, but you never, or I wouldn't say never, but it's not great practice to have text in full black because it can become a lot of contrast with the background, especially if the background is white. In our case, it's not white, but I'm still gonna apply a very dark color to it, but not pure black. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's apply all main text first. So in order to do that, I'm gonna come to our type scale here, open our menu, and all the styles that at the moment look black. I'm just gonna select like that. And I've decided to use this, the shade that we have of the main green for the text. However, you could have used, for example, the purple or even the yellow if you wanted. But this again, personal choice. I'm just gonna go ahead with the green shade. So as you can see here, now it says the asterisk. So we're gonna go ahead and update that. So now you won't notice the difference at plain sight, but if I really zoom in on here, you can see that it's actually not pure black. So if I were to make it pure black, just to show you how it is, I would come here and say, you see to the very bottom left corner, and now it's pure black, but we don't want that. So we wanna make sure that this is that green. Perfect. So that's all main text colors applied. Now we're gonna apply colors to placeholder text. So placeholder text is basically text that gives the user a hint of what they have to type in, for example, or so in our case, we only have one instance of placeholder text, which is this search here, which just gives the user a hint. So for that, so again, this is similar to the content separators. You'd think, oh, well, that's such a small detail, surely I can leave it. But if you have, for example, a UI with a lot of forms, you're gonna find that you have a lot of placeholder text, and if you don't take care of that detail, it is gonna show in the sort of final thing. So you wanna make sure you apply an appropriate color for this. So if we're using our shade for the main text, which by the way, I forgot to check, so let's check that. We're gonna be using something on the same sort of range of colors. We're not gonna jump to yellow because that wouldn't make sense, but it needs to be a little bit lighter because it can't stand out as much because it's just a hint. So again, I'm just gonna grab it from here this time rather than from the type scale because there's just one instance. And I'm gonna come here and replace this pure gray with our tone. And then you can see the asterisk here. I'm gonna go ahead and update that and take our tick and check it. Perfect. So now we have main text, placeholder text, and now let's go ahead and do the content separators. So for the content separator, in our case, it's actually placed on top of the yellow background, so it wouldn't make sense making it pink. So it needs to be some kind of yellow. So let's go ahead and check which one we would be using. So I would say we would use this one over here. Let's have a look at how it looks. Yeah, so that looks good. It's still there, but it's subtle enough that it doesn't distract the user from the actual content. So because this one is already being used for shadows and so on, we already have a tick, so we don't have to do anything there. Great. So now with that we have all of that. Okay, so now is the fourth and final step. This is the most fun step, but the reason why you should always leave this step last in applying images and non-interactive icon colors, like we talked before, is that images can be very pretty, right? If you have a good photography, they can influence how you apply colors because you almost feel like you're done, like you just apply an image and it just looks so beautiful. So you might get a little bit distracted if you apply images first. So always apply images or anything that is decorative at the very end. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's do images and image overlays. I'll explain in a minute what those overlays are. So first, let's delete this ugly gray squares from here. And now let's apply our images. So I'm gonna go ahead and select these from here, copy that. And then, I don't know if you know this trick, but to paste in place in Sketch, you can select the artboard and then hit Command V to paste, and it will paste it in place. And then let's just bring them to the very top, arrange. Oh, there you go, they're at the top. Okay. Right, so now they're there, and obviously let's bring this area here to the front, to the navigation. There we go. So now I'm going to explain how these images are made. So in our case, the client didn't provide photography. This hypothetical client didn't give us any sort of photography for this exercise. So I chose these images myself. And because they were not made for the brand, they obviously don't fit perfectly, but you can do things to sort of fix this, right? So as you can see, they all sort of have like a color applied to them. So let's have a look at how that's made. You can see that there's a layer that I'm moving around here that I've placed on top, and it has a color applied to it. So this color that this has applied is actually our tint, one of our tints. So I'm using this tint over here. If I just sample that so you see it. Yeah, so I'm using that tint for the overlay. So let's go ahead and check that before we forget. And then you can see that this one has more of like a gray sort of tint to it. This one, so green, green, yellow, yellow, and this probably is pink. So we're actually using all the tints from the 3 brand colors to randomize the sort of overlays on the images. So if I just ungroup this and show you, this is like the green overlay. This one is the yellow overlay, if you see it moving around there. So let's go ahead and check all of those tints on the first row because we're actually using them all. So great, so now that we have that, let me show you how I actually achieve this effect for having these overlays. So the trick to this is that if I just make it here, so if you can see here on the right where my mouse is, you have the blending modes here. So you want to make sure that you set it to multiply, because if you set it to normal, the tint is really going to show through. And even if you reduce the opacity to say, I don't know, 50%, or even 20, you see how it like washes the image out compared to how that one looks, which is the same one. So you want to make sure that it's set to multiply in the blending modes here in Sketch. And then you can leave the opacity to the 100%. And it'll, basically what multiply does is that it brings the colors from underneath out. So yeah. Okay, so those are applied. And now let's apply these ones over here. Let's copy those. Great. And then this one has the same treatment. I just added like the green overlay here, as you can see there, with the multiply on. And then this is just a placeholder image for which the color is already checked. I decided to have it green just to bring that element of green a little bit more into the interface. It could be another color. This is perhaps personal preference, but we already have it checked anyway. It's this color over here, so we don't have to do anything there. And then let's bring in these 2 images again here. Same thing, same treatment. And then the last one would be this area over here. So let me add that. So the reason why I've chosen to do this area purple that you can see here is because purple has a certain relation in our interface with our choices to selection. So I've chosen to make it purple, so it still has some kind of connection to that selection color, which is the brand purple, but it wouldn't work if we made it the brand purple, if I show you, because it's just very strong. So it will take away from the actual image that is going to be presented here. So instead, I'm going to use our tone that we're already using for something else, so we don't have to check it. And then let's just copy the image in. And the image also has an overlay here, I believe the yellow one. Yeah. Great, so that's all of our images applied. And then the last thing is applying color to non-interactive icons. So non-interactive icons, as I said before, is just icons that inform the user about something, but they don't have an action behind them. So for that, we're gonna go ahead and apply our yellow, and then we're gonna apply a background color to sort of bring them together a little bit. So the only ones that we have are these ones over here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete these and copy these other ones. So our brand yellow is already checked on our palette, so that's good. And then let's just make sure that we have this color checked here. So the background that I am using is one of our tints, one of our yellow tints. So let's go ahead and grab the tick and bring it over here. Perfect. And then the last thing really that you should really leave to the last step on your process is doing any sort of like welcome or like splash page on the interface. Because like I said before, it could really influence how you do the rest of the interface. And it's just, there's way more important things before you get to this stage. Of course, this is, for me, is the most fun bit. So I really enjoy it, but you should really leave it last. So I'm just gonna go ahead and remove that and grab this over here. This is perhaps the most subjective part of it. You could have chosen to have the icons in purple or in yellow. It doesn't really matter. I personally like how it looks like this. So let's just make sure that we have everything checked. So the icons are in green, which we already have checked. The other icon is in purple, which we already have. So let's just make sure that we have these backgrounds in. So this one, I believe, is this one, which we already have checked for something else. And then this one, I believe it's this green, which we already have checked. And then the yellow, let's just make sure we have that one too, is this one over here, which we already have. Perfect. And then the text, again, you could have made it the sort of dark green, the shade that we used, but I decided to make it green. This doesn't have as much importance as the other elements that actually have a function attached to them or like an action behind them. So yeah, so that is us finished with applying colors to the interface. So now I've just added the results here for the sake of seeing it a little bit clearer, because I know Sketch is a bit fiddly. So everything is applied and we're done. So just as a recap, because I know it's very overwhelming to hear so much information at once. So in the part one, we chose the palette by deciding on a color combination rule. Then we chose our main colors. Then we chose our neutral or foundation colors of those main colors. And then we chose our system colors. And then in part two, which we just did in the live demo, we applied the colors to any big areas. We applied color to interactive elements that we looked at: standard buttons, CTA buttons, links, and etc. Then we applied color to text and other text elements like the separators I was mentioning. And we applied images and non-interactive icon colors last. And that's it. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Brilliant. Thank you, Carmen. Yes, if you have any questions, feel free to add to the Q&A. We have a few minutes for questions, but you can also send an email, to Carmen or I at any point with questions. Let's just wait a little bit to see if there are any questions.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I must have explained really good that we have no questions.
You did, but you do have one question.
Okay. Fair enough.
How do you check color accessibility for prototypes? Is a question from Alexander.
Great. So actually, that's a really good question, because I wanted to show you how that would look here in Sketch. So for example, let me just draw something like a random shape. And I'm just gonna go ahead and color it with, I don't know, maybe this one, just to make something. And then I'm gonna add some text on top. And then make it white, obviously. So let's make it white. And I'm just gonna make it big so we can actually see something. Right, so imagine this was like one of your buttons. So if you wanted to make sure, obviously this is a very obvious scenario. I'm convinced that it does pass accessibility, contrast, background text contrast. But if you wanted to check, you come here. I'm just gonna move the zoom navbar. So you go to plugins and you go to clues here, or class, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. And then you see that it comes up here. So it's telling you that it passes the AA level and the AAA. And then say, for example, you were like, actually, I don't like this, very dark color. You could tweak it. And at some point, if you look here, you see how now it doesn't pass the AAA any longer. And at this point here, it stops passing the AA test. So yeah, you always want to make sure, and it's really good because you can tweak it as you go and see if it passes or not. And you can see the ratio down here and the text size that you need, which in our case is large. So yeah.
Brilliant. I have another question here. So before that, there was a comment from Nick saying no question, but a huge thank you for all the very helpful info. I have a long list of to do as a follow-up. Great. And a question from Adam who says, that was really great. Thank you. A question about your workflow. Do you go straight into a sketch from concepts, or do you use something else beforehand, like Illustrator, to try things?
So the answer is always Sketch. The only thing that I do outside of Sketch for applying colors is basically what I showed over here. Yeah, what I showed over here to sort of decide on a combination. Then I will jump into the Canva color wheel and decide on the combination there. But then the rest, so for example, choosing the green that we chose here, I do all of that in Sketch. So you want to avoid sort of mixing too many tools, because then you can end up with inconsistency. So always jump into Sketch. And something that I didn't mention, I use Sketch, but of course you could use Figma, Adobe XD, whatever it is that you use would be good. Yeah.
Brilliant. So there are a few other comments just saying thank you. That was very helpful. So thank you so much for your comments, and thank you, Carmen, for the brilliant talk. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to Carmen or I. You can get her email on carmen@frutostudio.co.uk. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.